Hi everyone, today I'll be talking about the mystery of the Eucharist. Well, the way we had Mass and adoration of the Blessed Sacrament quite often, and during adoration everyone would fall prostrate before when the host is unveiled and placed on that monstrance. When Father lifted up that monstrance, it was a majestic sight. I felt small and I felt that I didn't deserve to go any closer. What struck me was that at Mass, it was the same Eucharist that Father would bring out to celebrate. However, there was no falling of faces or prostration. I even got to receive that Eucharist into my mouth, and I realized then how much I didn't understand the Eucharist because, we're doing so many things in a different situation, but when we come to the Mass, it's a bit different. So how does this reconcile? Do we really understand the Eucharist if we don't show the same reverence, if I don't show the same reverence? So I hope that during my 8 weeks away at retreat, God could reveal to me the mystery of the Eucharist and also learn how to appreciate it. And he taught me through a session by a priest, Father Michael, and I'm quite excited to share that with you today. So in the Catechism of the Catholic Church 1324, it says that the Eucharist is the source and the summit of Christian life, and it should be the strength of Christian life. And perhaps that is why after I come out from Mass, I feel more invigorated, more lively than, if I would have gone through the day without Mass. And maybe that's a saying, start the day right with Mass, giving us strength. Maybe perhaps now I realize that this strength comes from the Eucharist. But some of the times I realize that, that is not our experience. That is not my experience. It's going through the Mass and Eucharist sometimes is a very bland experience, and there is a lot of mechanical behavior in the past. On days that are bad. So I heard a story of a priest who was celebrating Mass, and halfway during Mass his microphone stopped working, and he was at the point of saying peace be with you, but the microphone wasn't working, so he said, this microphone, it's not working. And the congregation said, and so with you. I think there is a lot of just following the process, and I'm not really understanding what is going on. There's a story of a father who brings his child to Mass, and in certain churches there are crying rooms where it's completely soundproof, and there's a TV screen inside so you can watch it for parents to bring their kids and they can cry all they want inside. So the father brings his child into the crying room, and for that Mass, somehow the speaker wasn't working in the crying room and the child couldn't hear anything. And the Mass went on, and at the end of the Mass, the child came up and he came to his father, and his father asked him, hey son, how was the Mass? And the child said, oh, father, it was good. And the father asked him, okay son, how would you describe the Mass? And the child said this, daddy, first Superman came inside and he was looking for something, but he couldn't find it. So he searched under the table to find it, he couldn't find it. He searched below the table to find it, but he couldn't find it. He searched behind the table, the left and the right of the table, at the sides of the table, behind him at the table, and he couldn't find it. And so he asked all the people, where is it? And all the people said, sorry, we don't know. So he kept searching and he's searching and searching. Daddy, and after that, Superman turned behind and spoke to the other small Supermans and said, find it, where is it? And so the small Supermans got their torches and their sticks and they walked into the cave to find it. They searched and searched the cave, but they came out with nothing. Finally, Superman walked around and he found it in the small fridge behind him. He went to the fridge, took out the sweets, gave it to everyone, distributed to everyone, went back, washed the dishes, said ta-ta, bye-bye, and everyone left after receiving the sweets. A big show, right? Sometimes to us, the Eucharist and the Mass is a big show. Sometimes for me, going to Mass is also a big show where I sit through and I just go through the motion. In Genesis chapter 1, 26 to 27, it talks about how human beings were created in the likeness and image of God. And Adam and Eve committed sin. They fell from greater dignity that God has always wanted for his people. We had the greater dignity, but we lost it. And God has always been wanting to raise our dignity back to where it was. And a lot of prophets were sent, but couldn't do it. And so that was when the Father sent the Son, Jesus, to give of his own self so that we would be raised, our dignity would be raised through Jesus, and the dignity of humankind be raised. And so every time we partake of the Holy Eucharist, Jesus Christ, we partake in raising our dignity. So when I come for adoration or be in front of Blessed Sacrament, I try to learn and to realize that, it is truly Jesus standing in front of us, Jesus waiting for us there, himself right in front of us, not a symbol, but Jesus himself in the Eucharist, capable of speaking into our hearts, hearing our needs, having a conversation with us, just as if a human was there. I guess we are not going to the adoration room to be in a place where we're reminded of Jesus, but to be with him. And I think when people put doubt into our minds, how can it be a wafer? I am unsure and unswayed. But this wafer, when it's transformed into the body and blood of Christ through a transubstantiation, it's still the same physical form, but its substance has completely changed into the body of Jesus. When people put doubt into our minds, how can you be sure it's just a wafer, right? It's just a biscuit. I'm unsure and I'm swayed, but I think this feeling of doubt that people plant into our minds were exactly the same as those in Jesus' time, the doubts in Jesus' time. And so in John chapter 6, verse 53 to 54, Jesus says, "Very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the man and drink his blood, you will have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink." And so he talks about his flesh and blood, and the people are wondering, how can this man give us flesh to eat? What rubbish is he talking about? And so the doubt is spread and put into people's minds. And move on to verse 60, his disciples asked him themselves, and they said, "Lord, this teaching is so difficult. Who can accept it?" Even the disciples found it difficult to accept the teachings of the Lord, even while Jesus was still there. And so what more are we to be better than the disciples and to not acknowledge that, I still struggle with understanding what this is. The disciples said, these teachings are so difficult, who can accept it? But then we move on to verse 66 in John chapter 6. Many of his disciples turned back and no longer went about with him. The word tells us that they were disciples, and in 3 years they walked with the Lord, and they saw everything: miracles, good works, healings, and Jesus' mercy, kindness, and love. But the moment they couldn't understand this, the moment they couldn't agree or to understand this teaching that Jesus has now put forth, they left. Just because they couldn't understand the concept of the Eucharist, of Jesus giving his body and blood, and they abandoned the Lord and walked off. Will we do the same? And then after that, after they moved off, Jesus says something very moving and touching to our hearts. And he says in John chapter 6, verse 67, as we're moving on, he asked the disciples who were still with him, "Do you also wish to go away?" And Peter replies to him, "And whom shall we go?" And so it's just like this, while others lead us astray and we doubt, this is the same thing that we're doing, right? Just like in Jesus' time. Even in Jesus' time, there was still doubt while Jesus was still there. They were disciples, but they chose to abandon the Lord. They were trying to understand it with their intellect. This teaching is too difficult. Who can understand it? But you and I cannot understand the Eucharist with our intellect. And it's just something that we cannot understand. I cannot understand. The Eucharist is a mystery to you and me that I have realized, and a mystery cannot be understood. If a mystery is understood, then it ceases to be a mystery, right? So I think approaching the Eucharist with our intellect, or with my intellect, is really something that will not ever work out. And the only way to really grasp what the Eucharist means is to approach it with our hearts. And I realized that I can only begin to appreciate the love and the mystery of the Eucharist with my heart and not my head. And the Gospel of John is really symbolic. In John 13:23, on the last day of his supper, John was reclining his head on the chest of Jesus. He was surrendering his intellect to Jesus. The best approach you can have to understand the Eucharist is to surrender your intellect to Jesus. John putting his head on the heart of Jesus, as he rests his head on the heart of Jesus. And as these men have seen everything that Jesus has done but still doubt, because they were trying to understand with what their mind says. But if we go with our heart to approach the Eucharist, to approach that Jesus is truly there in front of us, And that's when we can appreciate and grasp His love through the Eucharist to raise our dignity for us. That's why I've always wanted to make logical sense of the Eucharist, right? Because it's still the same wafer, but nothing Jesus did was logical. He healed the deaf, He healed the dumb, He healed the blind. That was not logical. He brought the dead back to life, and that was not logical. The cross was not logical. Jesus died when He didn't need to. Why is it that the Eucharist should be logical in our lives, that we demand reason for the Eucharist? So Jesus told us that, would we rather believe in human ideas or Jesus, the Word in the Bible? Not a symbol, a real presence. My dad told me when he was traveling, he was in this church and the nuns would prostrate and bow deeply every time the communion minister would pass by them to just show such great reverence and acknowledgement of the presence of God, of Jesus walking by. Can you imagine just Jesus walking by while you're sitting down in the pews? Will you not bow? And so I think that was a really beautiful lesson that I've learned, that as Jesus walks by, we are more aware of His beautiful presence and His grace passing by us. On the night Jesus was betrayed, He took bread, and Jesus knew that there was going to be betrayal. He knew Judas was going to betray Him. Yet He still took that bread and cup. Peter's denial, Judas, and all of the apostles that might not have stuck with Him. And every time I come with my attitude in front of the Eucharist that feels like filth, with my filthy and terrible attitudes taken for granted, and the Lord still takes that cup from me at Mass, in the Eucharist, and offers it to me, for me to have eternal life. And realizing how Jesus offers this sacrifice for us, there are two dimensions, the meal and the sacrifice. So there's two, meal and the sacrifice. And every time we come into the Eucharistic presence, I feel that we're not just coming to the table of the Lord for a meal, but we're coming to the foot of the cross of Jesus. We're experiencing the sacrifice of Jesus, the sacrifice of the Christ. We're not repeating that same crucifixion and meal process, but we are living in the present moment during that sacrifice, because Jesus' time is not in Chronos. Chronos is our time. It goes linear like this. But Jesus' time is Kairos. Jesus is not bounded by time, and we are brought back into the exact moment when Jesus offered His body and blood at the Last Supper, and at the moment when He died on the cross for us, pouring out His life for us. That two aspects, the meal and the sacrifice, is we are living in the present. We are sharing with His suffering in the present moment. It's not a repeat of events, but it's the actual event itself. We are brought back every single time, the same sacrifice every single Mass. We're becoming a part of history, the same history that Jesus died 2,000 years ago. Jesus is not restricted by time or space, and we must believe that it is the same sacrifice that goes on by the Eucharist. Every time we come in front of the Eucharist in adoration and everything, it is that same Jesus dying on the cross. And every time I feel broken or shattered, rejected or hurt, ashamed and mocked by the world, we come in front of the Eucharist in adoration or in Mass, and I think I shouldn't escape from the Eucharist, because when coming in front of Him, I meet a Lord who understands, who a Lord is going through the same as me. I come in front of the Eucharist and the Lord who understands my pain and understands your pain when you're feeling rejected, suffering, afraid, lonely, scourged. A Lord who is present in the cross, offered to you. He says He understands your pain. And I can't fathom the depths of this mystery. So let us offer up our pain and our humiliation to the Lord at the cross. And when we are stripped of our dignity, there will be a Lord who understands, who knows and has gone through it. Also, brothers and sisters, I think I'm still learning about this mystery, but I encourage by this new perspective of what the Eucharist means, to believe that Jesus is really there waiting for me. And it can only be understood by the heart. So I think it's really nice that we are being blessed with this beautiful sacrament. So let's just hold it close to our hearts the next time we go for Mass and we see Jesus.